My name is James. I'm a third-year student from the University of Lincoln. I'm a typical student with a reasonably active lifestyle. Friends, parties, a part-time job and university work usually keep me occupied. My story started about a month ago when I was on my way home from work and it started raining. I decided to stop and take shelter under a nearby shop canopy. Lying in the corner was a man in his late 20s. He had a big beard, multiple layers of clothing, and he was hidden under a quilt. I didn't make much of it then, but later when I was back home, drinking a warm cup of tea, it hit me. The luxuries that I have, and I've kind of taken granted for, is not the same for everyone. I agree that everybody knows about it to a certain extent, and we're constantly reminded of poverty, homelessness, and rough sleeping in places like Bangladesh and Somalia. But what about Britain? One of the world's leading economies. There was an abundance of data available online, and some of the statistics I found on homelessness was eye-opening to say the least. The Department for Communities and Local Government have estimated that in autumn 2014, the total of rough sleeping in England was 2,744. The information I found made me realise that the hardships that rough sleepers face on a day-to-day basis is more than you and I can comprehend. I wanted to look further into these, not the statistics, but the people that made them. I wanted to know how someone could end up in this situation, about what help and what services there are available, and how could I make a difference. Before looking at Britain as a whole, I wanted to start in Lincolnshire. The reason being that I've lived here for 3 years and I've got a reasonably good idea of the demographic. On the surface, it really didn't look that bad, but my research into local homeless charities told me otherwise. I thought it was time I found out more about this in person. My first stop was at Nomad Trust, which provides emergency shelter for the homeless in Lincoln.
Hi there.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Brenda, manager here.
Nice to meet you, I'm James. Brenda was kind enough to talk about this issue with me. I wanted to do this to get a better insight into the living conditions of homeless shelters. What do the Nomad Trust do?
The Nomad Trust is an emergency night shelter for the homeless in Lincolnshire.
And do you think that homelessness is increasing in Lincoln?
It appears to be for certain groups of people. I think there's been benefit changes around particularly migrant workers who previously they have leave to be in the country. They're not illegal in the country, but they can't always claim benefits. And if their circumstances change, if they've had work, for instance, and they've had a home, they lose their job, they're then not entitled to benefits always, and without benefits they can't maintain a tenancy, they can't, if they haven't got a job. We have a problem with that at the moment because we can't get any funding for them either.
What do you think some of the main reasons for homelessness in Lincoln are?
The reason we always get given, or the huge majority of people tell us, it's relationship breakdown. Now that may be because of drug or alcohol or domestic abuse. There's often background issues, but the main reason is relationship breakdown.
Is that people being kicked out of the house by the other partner, or?
Possibly. Traditionally it's been the man that leaves, which is why we have more men in than women, although
Right.
That's not necessarily the case now. We are getting more and more women coming into the service, but generally the men leave, but it may be for various reasons, as I said, because of drug use or alcohol, or just that the relationship isn't working and one party has to leave. So they find themselves homeless, and if they haven't got the money or the wherewithal to set up another home, which not everyone has, then they can very quickly find themselves on the street. And financial reasons, of course, as you know, if they can't afford to keep, some people get evicted from rented properties and don't have any way of paying off those arrears, so they find themselves homeless.
So what would be the sort of procedure for someone who is homeless to come and ask for your services?
It varies. We sometimes get calls from other organisations that they're working with somebody who's going to be homeless or about to be homeless. Some people turn up just at the door. We do our admissions from St Mary's Church, so we sort of give the admission details to whoever phones up. But people can just turn up on spec as well. And if we've got room and if they pass a risk assessment, we can bring them in.
Okay.
So it can happen, like somebody could be homeless today, and if we've got room we can bring them in tonight.
So how would you say that you're funded? Is it through donations or?
It's mainly through donations. We can apply for housing benefit for anyone that's eligible. We can claim per night, per person. So if they are entitled to housing benefit, we claim from the council. But other than that, it is purely by donations, and that can be goods or financial. And we are lucky because we do get a lot of support. I think because although we're now merged with the YMCA, we are a local Lincoln charity, and people seem to recognise that, and they donate. Schools and churches particularly, harvest time, Christmas time, we get an awful lot of food, which keeps us going. We've got cellars downstairs that you wouldn't believe, stocked with tins and things like that, and that keeps us going pretty much for the year. The two main donation times are harvest and Christmas, and that keeps us going. But we also get donations from other people, regularly from Sainsbury's. They donate 3 times a week, and it can be fresh fruit, vegetables. What's great is that we can have bowls of fruit up there, which the service users can just help themselves to. So they are getting fresh fruit, and the vegetables then go into the meals.
Brenda was kind enough to show me around Nomad Trust facilities.
So this is one of the typical bedrooms. They just vary in size, but the beds are the same in all of the rooms, and we've got the 5 rooms. Each individual has a plastic box that they can keep their belongings in. It's not massive, so there isn't a lot of space. We have a little bit of storage downstairs where we can lock if they've got a huge rucksack or suitcase, but there's not a lot of space for people to bring a lot of their belongings. So if they were moving out of a house, for instance, if they got evicted and they had a house full of furniture, we couldn't accommodate that. So they would have to make other arrangements. Really, all we can have is a suitcase and a bag and stuff like that, but we really don't have a lot of storage space. We had a married couple in actually, who they had some crockery and cutlery and things like that, and they just had those bags stashed next to their bed because they didn't want to part with them, and you can understand that. But anything more than a couple of bags we can't accommodate. So it's a real shame because people either have to dispose of their stuff or rely on friends or family to keep it for them, because we just can't store it.
Do you work with a lot of other charities?
We work together with a lot of organisations in the city, mainly because we're dealing with the same sort of people. It might be that Framework, for instance, have a street outreach team, and we work closely with them because they are mainly focused on the rough sleepers. But we will then work with them. We might bring rough sleepers in, and then work with them to get the individuals housed. So there's a lot of collaboration with the Framework Street Outreach team. We also work with agencies as far as housing is concerned, because we're obviously trying to get people from here into more sustainable housing. So we'll work with organisations around that. GPs, probation services, addiction services. We'll try and help people to get appointments if they need them and support them to make those appointments. Sometimes if people are chaotic, they don't always know, that they've got to be in a certain place at a certain time, so we'll try and help with that as well.
The information that Brenda provided us with was very useful, and a lot of my questions were answered. But what about rough sleeping living conditions? Without an exact idea of this, I wouldn't be able to comprehend the life of a rough sleeper. So for this, I met up with Jonathan Goldsmith, who's part of the street outreach team at Framework's Pathway Centre. He promised to show us around some of the hotspots in Lincoln, so I can get a better perspective on the issue.
Both locations we're going to check today are a little bit outside of the city centre, and as a service, when we first started, they weren't necessarily locations that we would check. We tended to keep towards the town centre, but as the service has evolved, and as obviously we've gained intelligence through our free phone number of where people might be sleeping, these are locations that we've had to check, and in fact on a few occasions we have found people sleeping at these places. They're not necessarily places that you would expect to find people, but like I say, historically we have. We've found them previously. It's not something that somewhere that would tend to be one of our hotspots, somewhere that we'll find people on a lot. It's just that in the past we have, and I just want to try and show you some of the challenges as a service we face, that actually we do have to check locations outside of the town centre, and also the importance of the free phone number these locations show for me, and actually mobilising the public, because without the general public we wouldn't have been aware of these. And what we've got here, we've got some old disused garages, but what we also had over there a bit further down was another garage, and historically that's somebody slept in that for a long time. It was potentially very dangerous because the garage wasn't in good condition, but it was also dangerous for that person's health because of the rubbish and whatnot, and there were rats living in the garage, and for a long time he wouldn't engage with us. We tried all sorts to get him engaged, and he just wouldn't. So as a service we won't just keep going back to someone and allow that to happen. So it sounds a bit odd but actually deterrence in our work actually plays a really key part. So what we did is we liaised with the landowner to get them to knock down the garage, to try and take the site that they were using away from that person, and it actually worked because it encouraged that person to engage with us, because we took the site away from them, and as a result of that, after visiting them for many months, we were able to actually house them quite quickly after the shed was destroyed.
So deterrence plays a big part in your work then?
Yeah, it sounds strange, but not everybody wants to accept our help. Where necessary, it is a really key part. If you look at the modern day design of a bus station, of a city centre park bench, or city centre bench, sorry, both are quite obviously designed to deter somebody from sleeping on them. Gone are the days of the big benches. It's now very slim, just to sort of rest your backside on rather than lay across.
So do you often get told that they don't want your help at all, or?
No, mostly people quite desperate for the help. Obviously sometimes people will say go away, might be for a number of different things. That could be through ill health, that could be that a mistrust of services, perhaps maybe let down in the past, but just because they tell us to go away, we will be very persistent, and we won't give up. So we may go away that morning, but we will go back the next day and the next day and the next day, and try and break down the barriers to try and get them to work with us.
So how do you relate to somebody, or how do you approach somebody who is rough sleeping in your work?
In what way? What do you mean?
And how would you approach them and start a conversation to eventually get help? Build a relationship, essentially.
Yeah, so ultimately we will go and we will wake people up. We'll be very assertive. Obviously our first concern is that person is okay, their initial welfare, and from that it's, I guess, as you would anybody else really. Rough sleepers are no different to the rest of us. Ultimately they're vulnerable, not dangerous, and we'll speak to them, we'll show them empathy, and try and understand the reasons why they've ended up in that situation in the first place, to try and find a solution and make sure they don't end up back there.
Yeah. It was sad to see the living conditions of rough sleepers. There's dirt, there's rubbish, unsafe structures, and they face health risks on a day-to-day basis. My understanding of the issue is getting clearer, and I understand that there is temporary accommodation and night shelter for homeless people. But what about the long run? Not just somewhere to sleep, but for starting a home. I met up with Ardva from HomeMatchmaker to find out more.
Hello.
Hi there, I'm James.
Hi James, I'm Arthur. Welcome to HomeMatchmaker.
So thanks for speaking with us today. Can you tell us a little bit more about the HomeMatchmaker?
Sure, HomeMatchmaker is a charity that was set up a year ago as a direct response for a need in the city of Lincoln for homelessness. The idea behind the project is that we enable the church to house the homeless. Very simply, that we find a church that's got a heart for helping out and reaching out to the homeless. Then we find a private investor to buy a house, we put the two together, and then we're available for services in the community to refer people to us. A number of referrals have come through, mainly from probation or from the housing team at the City Council. Nearly everyone who's come to us has come in a position where they've got no food. So we do very practical things. First step is to sort them out with food banks, sort out finances comes second, benefits, getting the right benefits, finding the right agencies and what we need to do to help them. For example, you can't just get benefits if you haven't got a bank account, you can't get a bank account if you haven't got ID. So we help the person get their ID, get their benefits sorted. Perhaps if they've got arrears, they can't get a council house, so we work with other agencies like Christians Against Poverty, and we encourage our tenants to go on a course with them to learn about managing their money and taking responsibility for their money. Then we find out that they do that, and it requires you to cook on a budget, kind of like students but trying to eat healthily. So that then has led to our tenants then going on a cookery course. So again, we do that in partnership with Spring Kitchen in Lincoln Market, and the tenants go along for a couple of hours a week and they learn how to cook.
You mentioned a lot about working with other churches. Is there a strong religious background?
For me, I'm a Christian, and Christ is at the heart of my charity. But then truth, I would be mortified if our befrienders came alongside a tenant and said, you have to be a Christian, and we're Bible bashing them over the head, because we're not here to do that. In fact, we really clearly train all the volunteers from the churches on safe boundaries and building relationships, confidentiality, and we're really clear that you're not there to convert them to Christianity. That's a form of abuse in itself if it's done wrongly, and we are literally to come along and shine like stars, be positive role models. One of our tenants describes her church befriender as better than a mum. I don't think the compliments get better than that.
You said about helping people by training with skills and things, especially cookery. Could you tell us a bit more about the one at the Spring Kitchen?
Certainly. We shopped around to try and find what agencies are out in the city that offer education around healthy eating, if we're honest. We had a little bit of dealings with the community healthy eating trainer. This really wasn't pitched at the right level that our tenants needed. So we did a bit more research, and they went on a course with Spring Kitchen. So they contacted them, and they drop in every Tuesday afternoon for 2 hours, and they get to cook food that they're actually then learning how to cook, and then they can take home that evening, which is quite exciting, and can have family meals. And it also educates them how to do it for next time. And you can see a difference. You notice a difference. Their pallor of their skin, perhaps when they first come in, is more grey. Their eyes are dull, and just as the nutrition goes in their body and you're feeding them the right kind of food, you see a difference.
Meeting with a range of organisations and charities have given me a lot of information, but I feel like the journey wouldn't be complete unless I got first-hand experience. Ardva from HomeMatchmaker introduced us to Bev, who used to be a rough sleeper in the Mansfield and Nottingham area. We had a detailed discussion about aspects of government help for rough sleepers, and about the stereotypes and prejudices against rough sleepers from the general public.
So is there any help from the government or council?
They pay your rent while you're in the property, but the property's only for a year.
Right.
So after them 12 months, you're potentially back to the streets because you're not classed as priority.
Could you not apply for another 12 months after you finish that?
No.
No?
No. She won't actually evict you, but she looks to moving you on after a year. Yeah. And
So-
if you've got a rent arrears, you've got absolutely no chance of getting anywhere else. So potentially you are back on where you came from. So all that work over the years been for nothing really. That's what I'm dreading this year.
Yeah. Is that something that you face every year?
Yeah. In October I've been here a year, and I've got a feeling I'll end up back in Mansfield in the squat. Yeah, because I've got rent arrears with Mansfield Council. So I don't know. I might have to try and look for a private rent, but I think I'll be back in Mansfield before long.
Well, what do you think that the government could do to help with homelessness?
They could. I mean, when I was living in Mansfield, the estate I was living on, there must have been 100 empty flats with boards up. That could go to the homeless. It's just because it's a deprived area, but there's many empty flats in Mansfield, Nottingham, that could house all the homeless from that area, and they just don't bother because there's too much work to do on the flats. But the homeless, I don't care what it looks like, as long as they can move in.
Does
As long as they've got a roof over their head,
better
yeah.
than nothing?
Yeah, but they just won't.
Well, we focused a bit on shelter, but what about food in terms of...
You can get food banks, but obviously you've got nowhere to cook it if you're on the street. So I did it myself. You go into pubs and you sell it. You sell the food that you get given from the food banks because you can't use it yourself. But it's another way of earning money. To either get your drink or you get your next fix.
Well, what kind of things would they just give you, like raw materials?
They give you tin food.
Tin food?
It's all tin food, yeah. And there's nothing you can cook it on because you're not allowed to make fires in your squats, and there's no cooking things, so you end up selling it or giving it away.
Does that happen often?
Oh yeah, yeah. But I mean, you're only allowed. I think you're only allowed 3 a year now in Mansfield, but all 3 get sold, yeah.
We spoke to Johnny, who goes out with the street outreach team.
Oh yeah.
The Pathway Centre, and basically he goes around and he tries to get rough sleepers off the streets and he approaches them. But he says a lot of the time people don't want his help and they tell him to go away.
No, because it's. I mean, like with HomeMatchmaker, there's rules that you have to follow.
Right.
And it's just easy not to follow the rules. It's easy to stay on the streets. You've got no rules. There's nobody to answer to. It's just you and your friends. Where, like saying HomeMatchmaker, there's quite a few rules which you have to stick to, or else you can be evicted within 4 hours. You don't get long. Once they say you've got to move out, you've got to move out. So you stick to the rules. We're on the streets. That's what I miss about the streets, really. I actually do miss the not having no rules to follow.
Yeah.
Get up when I want, go out when I want, come in when I want. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned about you're there with your friends.
Yeah.
Do a lot of homeless people, they tend to stick together? Like
Yeah,
for
they do.
safety
Yeah.
and things?
Yeah. I mean, there used to be me and 3 others. We also used to stick together for 2 days. Yeah, because if you're on your own, you're more likely to get singled out and get picked on. Where if you're in a group of 3 or 4, they tend to just walk by you and leave you alone. Yeah.
Is that other homeless or just general
No,
public?
well, the homeless and the public. Especially if they're coming out of the pubs at night, late at night,
Yeah.
you'll get kicked or you'll get spat at or something thrown at you.
Does that behaviour happen often?
Regular, yeah. At least every weekend. Yeah, you just look down on. You're not like it. They don't see you as a member of society. And that's what I got told quite a few times, that I was not a member of society actually.
So you mentioned about people sort of saying that you're not part of society
Yeah.
and things like that.
Yeah.
As I remember I was walking through town once and a woman approached me and she asked me for some change. And I said, at the time I didn't have any change on me, so I was like, I'm sorry, I don't have any change. And she just looked at me and she said, yeah, thank you for acknowledging me.
Yeah.
Is that something that people just turn away?
Yeah, you definitely. You don't going to get a second glance half the time unless you've got a dog with you, like the people from Big Issue. Everybody stops because they've got a dog, but they don't necessarily buy the Big Issue. They'll
Yeah.
give the dog something, I know quite a few people that give the dog treats, but they'll completely ignore they won't even see the man selling the big issue. Yeah, that happens a lot. You're just not there. You're invisible.
Before I started learning about the homeless situation in Lincoln, I didn't really know a lot about it apart from my limited first-hand experiences and what I'd researched online. After speaking to various organisations and charities, and especially Bev, who used to be a rough sleeper herself, I feel like that there is a stigma attached to homeless people and rough sleepers in terms of drug abuse and alcoholism. What I found the most surprising though was some of the attitudes of the general public towards homeless people and rough sleepers, as if they're less than human or beneath society. Although homeless people and rough sleepers need help individually, I think that there needs to be more help for charities and organisations to keep providing the work and the services that they do, whether that's through extra funding or volunteering. The biggest thing that I learned was that anybody can be homeless. It doesn't matter who you are or where you're from, it can just be one bad event or a series of bad events that can deteriorate and leave you homeless in that situation. Anybody can be homeless, but anybody can choose to help the homeless.